survivors, and welcome to a moment of relief, the first aid spray show where we can talk about whatever we want. And in this episode we're going to be talking about ourselves, but also talking about Resident Evil. My name is Si, and joining me on this episode is Steve.
Hola, hello everybody.
Here's Kelsey.
Yo yo.
And so when this episode drops for the public, it will be on our 5th anniversary as a podcast. So we thought we would celebrate with a little bit of just a discussion about first aid spray, but also, Resident Evil, where it was when we started, where it is now, because Kelsey, as you said before we start recording, it might be the craziest 5 years Resident Evil has had, or it's certainly up there. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about comparing that and talking about the future. For a little bit of context for those 5 years, just to dial it back a little bit, what have we had in the last 5 years? Death Island, Remake 4, obviously, Village and its DLC, 7 and its DLC, Remake 3, Remake 2, Infinite Darkness, most of the Infinite Darkness comic book as well, RE-verse, Resistance. Am I missing anything?
Netflix series, Welcome to Raccoon City.
There you go. Absolutely crazy list of things for the last 5 years. When we
Free
started,
board games.
or thereabouts. When we started the show in November of 2018, the second episode, the first episode we ever did was just talking about our history with Resident Evil and just kind of as a way for us to get to know each other and get comfortable talking to each other. But then our second episode was previewing Remake 2. And it was all about the hype for that. And that, obviously not the first game in the RE engine, but really early on into. So we've kind of been through that whole period. Steve, what are your general sort of thoughts about this last 5 years of Resident Evil, where it slots in with the grand 25 years?
Busy.
Busy.
Very busy. I feel like narratively, in the big overall massive scope, we've moved, 2 main entries forward, but then there's everything else. Everything else, a lot of it looking back. Yeah, it's amazing how much strength and nostalgia has had in these past 5 years, and yet the technology, obviously the RE engine and the like, has been pushing forward aplomb, and yet still we can't quite get those anniversary games, can we?
We've been asking for the whole 5 years,
Yeah, well, I mean, we get your RE versus and your Umbrella Corps. It's on that side, rough. Everything else, fantastic. Like, really, even if you don't like the remakes, you've still got Village and 7. You've still got Infinite Darkness. You've got the movies. You've now had your franchise Avengers moment, even if it was a bit of a wet squib. Me personally, as someone who just likes all of these things, I'm laughing. But I know there's many different facets to how people react to it. But overall, I think Capcom are laughing because they're just taking all the money to the bank, aren't they? Like, idiots like me will buy everything, but pretty good.
I mean, the thing that comes up a lot, obviously, is that, Capcom, you're leaving money on the table by not doing X, Y, Z, the classic collection being one of them. But do they need any more money? We talk about it. We talked about it several times over the course of the show, watching the sales figures grow for the last bunch of games. And some of the more recent entries are now some of the best-selling entries that Resident Evil had. So it's an interesting conversation about, when it comes to comic books and stuff, they talk about like Golden Age and Silver Age and stuff. Like, I don't know if you would call this the Golden Age, because I think you might have to go back to the beginning for that. I think that's probably still, and up to RE4, RE4 included, I should say, because obviously that's a big important thing. This is at very least a very strong Silver Age, Kelsey, wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. It's funny because although we're saying 5 years, I think if we stretch a little bit, and I think we should include RE7, which was that's like 6. It's basically borderline, but that, like, I think back to when that game was coming out, I was in a very weird place with Resident Evil, and obviously being a huge fan back in the day, and then that just kind of waning, coming off of like RE6 and stuff like that, and then I remember being so kind of going into RE7 with not like a cynical view, but I knew going in that it was like, new characters and new settings and stuff, which had my backup to begin with, but I knew that it was going back to the horror style, and so I was like all in for that. But to have gone from that point, because I remember playing it for the first time, and then to tick off everything like you've listed that we've had since then, it's absolutely a silver age, because it's been something, at least one or two things every year, sometimes more Resident Evil stuff in that period of time than we have ever had. And we're talking about Capcom, like we always say it, like they're in such a strong position, and despite issues and some ups and downs, it's been broadly an incredible level of quality that they've maintained, and no one has done that. No one else has done that I can think of, to release that much stuff and maintain broadly that level of quality. And it's just so cool for me to think that, I was going to say bookended like my fandom with Resident Evil, but it's still going. There's still plenty to come in the future. But to go from absolutely loving the series and then drifting away from it and feeling like it was just not what I wanted it to be, to for the most part being sort of just brought right back and loving it more than ever before. And these past 5 years are the reason for that.
I think honestly I don't even know if there's a conversation for the most successful third-party company right now within those 5 or 6 years. If you said, like, I don't know who else could possibly compete with that output, because it's not just quantity, it is quality, and it's not just Resident Evil. And I know they're obviously Capcom have got so many franchises, they can't give them all that much time. You can insert your complaints about Dino Crisis, Mega Man. I don't think there's been much going on with Phoenix Wright in the last 5 years. But Street Fighter is still strong. Monster Hunter, huge. Devil May Cry 5 seems like a big success. I don't know much about the franchise.
No,
but,
it seemed like totally
it went down well. So they are firing on multiple cylinders. And importantly, quantity and quality, largely speaking. I'm the same with you. My Resident Evil fandom certainly dipped for a little while, and I came back in at Resident Evil 7, not necessarily cynically, but I really didn't know what to expect. I kind of stayed away from the hype cycle and didn't really know what was going on until the last minute, and then I just kind of on a whim was like, I'm going to get it. I enjoyed Revelations 2. I was like, this is one of the best Resi games we've had for a long time. I'll take the risk. Which feels silly to say now, but RE7 felt like such a departure. It was like, I'm going to go for it, and I got it day one. And what a genius decision to obviously reset everything was hugely important and needed to be done. But more than that, the fact they followed it up with a long-requested remake of Resident Evil 2, which went the other direction and was like, here's all the stuff you're familiar with. Here's a bunch of stuff you know. You got Resident Evil 7, completely new territory. But also here's a remake, and that obviously has been kind of a thing moving forward. As much as I would like more new entries and new stories that push the narrative forward in the last 5 years, 2 new games is pretty good considering the current climate and how long it takes to make these things, even amongst everything else they do. Steve, when it comes to Remake 2, do you think that was like... what's the happy version of Nail in the Coffin? Was it they really unfurled the flag at the top of the flagpole by that point and were like, we're coming for you, everyone else?
Just trying to... Happy version of Nail in the Coffin.
Taking the last nail out of the coffin. They removed the nail. The coffin is RE6, and RE7 is opening the window, and Remake 2 is the air freshener. RE2 is digging out of the...
They released some air freshener as well, didn't they, in the last few years?
Yes, those candles. I think, realistically now, the remake train, whether we want it to stop or not, it's here to stay, isn't it? I mean... It says that it's opened the industry forward to it in a somewhat, I would dare say, scary degree. We've got the likes of remakes of Dead Space and the original Last of Us. And then you've got more of your more niche things like the stuff that Night Dive do, M2. You've got the Konami collections, but I think the Silent Hill 2 remake is probably their effort in akin to this. Yeah, it's not quite as big, I would say, as like RE4's third-person shooter renovation, but it feels like them making such a high-quality remake has basically done that kind of thing for, that part of the industry, if that makes any sense. Not to pat Capcom too hard on the back, it's you re-released an old game from '98, well done. Just happened to be really, really, really polished, well done, and brought up to spec with modern age without compromising too much. Excluding narrative changes. I know, we're all lore fans, okay? I know things have changed. I know the police station's date has changed. I know certain voice actors and actresses are beloved and not present. I get that. But overall, the package of renovating something from 1998 to the current day, it's like the blueprint. And yeah, no, I would say that the aerosol's done its job. It's cleared the stink away of RE6. And I didn't hate RE6 that much.
Yes, indeed. I can say now that next year we're probably going to revisit Resident Evil 2 for a podcast 5 years on and see how we feel about it with the context that we're talking about now and stuff like that. And obviously we've had new members of the panel join First Aid Spray since that episode 4 where we reviewed Resident Evil 2 Remake. So I'm excited to get back into that, certainly. But I don't know, it was such an interesting time because I've obviously been through a journey with it, with Remake 2, and all the mixed feelings that have come with what happens when you remake, not just a classic, but my favourite game of all time. But that might be, at least when it comes to the modern era, the biggest Resident Evil has ever been. It was 100%. Everywhere. It was all over social media. Everyone was streaming it on Twitch. Mr. X this, gonna give it to you that. It was... massive statement for the future, which largely, I would say, they've maintained that quality. Kelsey, would you agree?
Yeah, I
think it's always going to probably be the one that everyone goes, this is the gold star. But
that's the bar to beat, yeah.
Yeah, completely. And I'm looking forward to in the future talking more about Remake 2 because when it came out, it was one of those games that, when you buy a game and you get basically butterflies in your stomach. That's what I had with that game, and there's not been many of those in recent times. And for them, I would actually say, even when Village came out, do you remember the whole thing with Lady D, took over the internet
very fair.
And Resident Evil has been everywhere. I think when we did the Alien Isolation podcast, I said it was games like that and Remake 2 and these Resident Evil games that have helped bring the horror genre back to popularity because gaming was in a weird place. Action games and Call of Duty and Destiny were all the popular things. Horror is now back, and indie horror. It's all the Twitch streamers are all over it, and Resident Evil 2 is a big part of that, and they've kept up the quality through Village, and it's ups and downs, whatever you think about it. Just from a broad sense, the quality is incredibly high, and then to end up with Remake 4, which we were all. In a weird way, I was sort of more nervous about that than I was Remake 2. I was so excited for Remake 2. I was like, how are they going to pull off 4? Right. Because, the casual gamer and stuff like this and how popular it is. And I think they smashed it. And they've just... We said don't pat them on the back too hard, but it's unbelievable what they've done in the past 5 years and to keep that quality up and for it to constantly be over the internet and to be among the conversation. Resident Evil is... one of those things that it definitely the casual is probably more aware of it than ever before because of these last few years, and 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 if the quality was terrible, we probably wouldn't be in that situation. So they've maintained it. I'm not going to say the the obvious, but there's those moments where they dropped the ball, but I think when it comes to the actual main output of those remakes and the main games, it's so difficult to criticize it. Any criticism is personal taste. Oh, I prefer this and prefer that. But as video games, and like Steve said, it's changed the way the industry is working and with nostalgia and remakes because they've seen the success that can be had. So yeah, it is interesting. Yeah, when it comes to the casual thing, I might have told this story before, so I apologise. One of my oldest friends, old school friend, not into horror whatsoever, they will readily admit that. Don't think I'm certain they've never played a Resident Evil before. They've seen some being played, RE4. They were the person that suggested to one of my other friends, maybe you should chuck that character in the bin. Oh, it works. She gets in the dumpster and she's safe. And that was something that we hadn't tried up to that point. So they always take ownership of that. But they've never really gone into it because it's not really their thing.
they saw the marketing for Village and they were like, should I get this?
Yeah.
My advice, of course, was no. You need to play Resident Evil 7 first. Actually,
Oh.
you need to do it properly. Yeah. I was like, I don't know if you would enjoy it anyway, because I don't know. It's not out yet. I might be judging by going off RE7. That was a scary game. So see how you feel about RE7 first. But that's a whole other thing. But yeah, like it really penetrated parts of the audience and gamer sphere and just general population with Village for sure. You mentioned about it's not all been good, but let's talk about the good stuff. We'll get to the bad stuff in terms of like highlights from the last 5 years. Steve, what has been some of the best highlights of Resident Evil in the last 5 years for you? You can pick all the obvious ones if you want, but
I mean, like, if we're counting RE7 as well, I just want to piggyback off what Kel said about indie games, right? And particularly horror games. At that time, we were like in the shadow of PT had ceased to exist, and most indie games were dominating the horror scene, but they were unfortunately of a very similar, samey genre where you're I don't like using the term, but walking simulator where there's jump scares, and all you could do is either hide, like your Outlasts, or die, like your Slender games, generally speaking.
Right.
And then RE7 comes back and goes, actually, what if you could just shoot them? They don't die, but you could shoot them, like your Jack Bakers and your Tyrants, and it somehow revitalised the genre. For the survival horror scene. So RE7 was a good one. As someone who likes horror games in general, being able to enjoy one again, because I'm one of those people who just couldn't get on with Amnesia, and seeing it become the cirque du jour, the big one, the big shot in the circus, not fun. And then obviously seeing them nail RE2, like, yeah, that was unexpected. Hell, the E3 announcement, like, I think me and Si have been casually talking on social media at the time. The E3 announcement, like,
yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Was that a PlayStation? Oh my god. Oh my god, it's Leon. Something to that effect. It was hype times, just the run up to RE2, and then sticking the landing. Having a sleepless night with James, being scared of someone walking their dog outside my house from footfalls of the Tyrant. That kind of resonance doesn't go away.
Yes.
And that will stay with me in the best possible way. But I don't want to talk about everything else because then no one else gets some fun stuff to say.
Yes, for sure. Our sort of like Remake 2, obviously, and again, we will talk about this next year, but hugely important for us as a show because certainly the hype for that was part of the impetus that First Day Spray even happened. And you and I, that video is now unlisted, unfortunately, on my channel. But
it's fine.
Yeah, it's like a proto episode of First Day Spray. It's like episode 0 of us.
Green Herb.
Yeah, sure. Let's go with that. Of us, talking about how we felt about the reveal and stuff like that. Looking forward to it, and it was kind of like the beginning of what would become First Day Spray. So that's interesting. 7 for me. I'll never, that first experience of playing 7 is just impossible to forget. There aren't many games that have filled me with dread in the way that game has done. There are parts of Village and parts of playing Remake 1 when I was younger and stuff like that, but that was such a huge moment, as you say, for horror gaming, which had kind of been... I wouldn't say lying low, but it was in a weird place, and it needed
jump scares and naff. That was
it felt a little bit like it had kind of developed itself into a corner, then Resident Evil did the Resident Evil thing, came along, gave it a shotgun, and said, "Fight your way out of that corner," I guess. Kelsey, what are the highlights for you from the last few years?
I do hate just saying remakes, but Remake 2 was huge, and Remake 4 was hugely surprising, because of where I stood on Remake 4, so I have to shout them out. But like I mentioned, the getting the butterflies in my stomach of picking up Remake 2, like I won't forget it. And that being said, like that's kind of is all the obvious stuff, and for me, it is weird to think about how, and this maybe kind of ties into what we might talk about in a minute, but when RE3 Remake came out, is just before then is when I discovered First Aid Spray, maybe a couple of months before, and obviously then the world went to absolute shit, like as it came out and it released, and I just have that period of time kind of ingrained in my mind of everything going upside down, not knowing what the hell was going on, but that game. And I was like, I remember I didn't really buy digital games, but I bought RE3 digitally because I wasn't sure if the postman was going to be able to deliver the physical copy.
Weird to say now, isn't it? But yeah.
So yeah, and then it turned out being. I know people have their thoughts about RE3, but I love it, and I loved every second of it, and yeah, that was such a big highlight, and it holds sort of a weird place in my memory, but definitely a highlight. And then I guess less obviously, I think we have to shout out things that maybe caught us off guard, and I think Lance Reddick's one of them, giving us like a Wesker maybe we didn't even know that we wanted, and in that weird TV show, unanimously, I think everybody who watched it, anybody with a sane mind came out of it saying he was incredible in that. And then to think about where we are now is kind of really sad, but that was such a big highlight as well, because I loved watching him and I loved that part. I loved his place in that show. And I really loved Welcome to Raccoon City as well. So I'm calling that a highlight for me. Like, crazy, weird, stupid film, but with loads of winks to the fans. Give it to me all day long. And yeah, it's just on and on. Like the baby in Village as well. Like we talk about horror moments. It's just that was I have to stop playing this game for a while now. It's just, there's so many highlights, and we keep joking about the lowlights. The good outweighs the bad.
Oh, absolutely.
By far.
Yeah. For sure. I'm glad that you've given the time to talk about some of those ones that might otherwise, through other avenues, be, the thing that gets kicked around, the badly beaten ball that's been kicked around way too much at this point. I remember actually when Remake 3 came out, I had a friend of mine message and be like, how does it compare to Remake 2? And I was, I was midway through the game at that point and was like, parts of it might be better. And I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, but I was having a great time, obviously, playing it at the time. And the way that it plays is just such a great little game to play. Yeah, it's a fun game to go back to over and over again. And I think I've said before, it's out of the remakes, it's probably the one that I've played the most, because it is just nice to jump into and mess around with. And it's just a good, fun action game. And similarly with Welcome to Raccoon City, I've watched it a few times and I enjoy it as much, if not more, every time. And it's going to be a film that I won't watch regularly, but every few years I'll go back to it, certainly. Way more than I will the other flicks that we've had, including most of the CGI movies. And I enjoyed that for what it's worth as well, in a kind of like dumb fun sort of way, in the same way that I really did enjoy parts of Death Island. I had a good time. It felt sort of, it's kind of stupid, but I don't know, it was sort of refreshing after some of the stuff that we'd had at that point. But we're going to obviously talk a little bit about some of the negatives and stuff from the last few years, and not to pick the obvious one, but Kelsey, you did say, obviously, weird to think about with Lance Reddick, and what a great sort of, I'd like to say warm welcome that the community generally gave him. I'd just say I didn't see any negative stuff, and it's really sad what happened. Unfortunately, not the only death that we've had in the Resident Evil community over the last few years. Paul Haddad in the last few years as well, and some other voice actors along the way. I'm not going to sit here and name all of them, because potentially I would forget them. But, it's always sad when we have to do that part of the news. But that is unfortunately, those are some of the things that part of doing First Aid Spray, and it sounds stupid, but like those are the parts I don't enjoy about doing First Aid Spray, when we have to cover stuff like that. That really sucks. But otherwise, it is good fun to make fun of our Everse, right? Like that is probably the low light of the series. One of the low lights of the series. Steve, go ahead.
It's the weapon to surpass Umbrella Corps. The worst part is, we did lots of things. Kels did this really nice video talking about the potential of our Everse, right? And got me thinking, oh yeah, actually, might be pretty good. and then that virtue that I had cultured and nurtured, one game mode.
3
God
maps.
knows how many flipping hound wolf characters, and just you know when you like you're cooking something, you can tell it's not thoroughly cooked through. That kind of vibe from this thing. It's like a half-baked project that wasn't finished, and then it was not long after RE Versus release, you see that Neobards are working on something else for Konami. I get the feeling they just kind of shoved this one out the door, but that's just me. That's just my thoughts on it. That's probably the low light for me. Like, obviously it sucks about how, many voice actors, Paul Haddad and Lance Reddick included, passed away. I think, to be honest with you, the only other thing that really annoyed me, and this is more of a community thing later on, was the way that some people would go straight into racial attacks. Like, that's the kind of thing that probably me off the most, sorry, out of anything in Resident Evil related. And it's community overreactions to nonsense like that. That's just, no, that's not cool. I don't mean to bring the mood down.
No, completely fair.
Let's just riff on Hound Wolf Squad again. Oh yes, many goggled men with assault rifles and drones and about as much personality as this wall.
Yeah, which, to be fair though, to bring it full circle, like some of the community, unfortunately. The people who... Yeah, there is, unfortunately, in the last few years, it's felt like we've had a lot of sort of bad egg sort of things when it comes to the Resident Evil community with people that... Yeah, I mean, bad egg is not a fair descriptor for the people that go out of their way to verbally abuse actors and stuff on social media. It's just...
100%.
Absolutely awful. But also just a lot of the hot take is terrible. I know that we just ragged on REverse, so it's sort of like, pot kettle and all that. But, the clickbait stuff, unfortunately, feels like we're in a bit of a slog through that right now. But turn that off, go play Remake 4, because I didn't point out in the highlights, but I'm with you, Kels, in the terms of that should have been a complete failure. Like, how do you remake one of the most important games of all time? And smashed it out of the park. So the highlights largely overshadow the lowlights. Kelsey, any more sort of downer moments?
No, not really. I mean, it's the same. Like, it's funny because if a game or something or a movie comes out that I really dislike or hate, I'm generally very good at moving on with my life. I'd rather just talk about stuff I enjoy.
Yeah.
REverse was an exception, but I think it's one of the only times where I felt personally insulted by the developers, and that was just because, as I said on our review, I was really cheerleading that game and saying, "Come on, let's rally behind this," and then. Yeah, they delivered, or didn't deliver, what they did, and so that's why it was fun, to have a go at it. But yeah, just community stuff. I mean, yeah, all that nonsense. I think I do think, and this is something I've mentioned before. Capcom, if anyone from Capcom is listening or watching, a better job needs to be done from the top down to basically call that stuff out. I've seen it in other franchises and fandoms. Star Wars and other things like that. Prominent people involved with the creation of these things will come out and just kind of call it out and say, no, that's not welcome. Haven't really seen that with Resident Evil, which is a bit of a shame from, the top.
Right.
I don't know why, but yeah, I think doing that would help. But yeah, I don't want to dwell on those people too much.
It's a weird one because obviously Resident Evil is a Japanese thing. Yes, so when it comes to sort of like the Western community, but I don't disagree with you, certainly. I think they probably deal with some stuff on the down low a little bit, but I do agree sometimes it is worth being like, when it comes to slinging insults at actors and... Sorry, but AI mods to replace voice actors you don't like, stupid stuff like that needs to be really publicly stamped out.
Yeah, I think if because trolls online are one thing, and generally it can be sort of just breezed past. But when it's so bad that people who have joined the franchise, and I'm talking about actors and voice actors, with the movies and games or whatever, that they remove themselves from the community, it's like, okay, so this is a problem here. This is not one or two trolls online. This is just, a wave of people that need shutting up. So, yes, just a little bit more work from Capcom on that side would be appreciated. I also understand it's very difficult, but yeah, that's just what I think about it.
I mean, it's interesting talking about the topic of voice actors, though. Like, that's one of the good things about the community, in some regards, because, they are, a lot of them are more involved with, not necessarily our podcast. Yes. They're a bit more homely, but they talk with lots of fans, lots of podcasts, lots of content creators, and they are a lot more involved. I feel like I mean, you've got you got like, the likes of like big casts at like Comic Cons and conventions, but then you've got people doing literal streams with each other. Yeah. That's a lot more involved. And on that note, you know, for all the flack that I've just like basically railed at the community for being this, that, and the other, there are plenty of people in the community who are much more grateful, kind, and gracious.
Yeah,
for sure.
And that warms my heart a little bit. You know, although I'm more of a fan of the fan arts of anything that's silly at the moment. That's just the way I roll.
I'm glad that.
Always have been.
Yeah, we should. I know. You know, we have kind of like been like, oh, these people suck. But you're right. We should. You know, at least touch on. Within the last 5 years, especially, you know, being part of First Aid Spray, it's been really nice to connect with so many people. You know, people that have come on and guested. Obviously, shout out to everyone that's been a guest on the show and given their time to us. And, you know, we've developed multiple friendships with these people and talk to them at a regular basis. But also just in general, not people that we've necessarily worked with, but people that we've all gotten to know through the community. And it's nice to have those, whether it's people that you knew about before or someone else that's come along and you're like, this is cool, this person's nice, or this person has created, you know, this awesome piece of art and stuff like that. That stuff's obviously great. Obviously, if you follow us on Twitter, not that I like to go on such a held site as much these days, but if you see us doing stuff, is usually I like to retweet you know, creations and artwork and stuff that people have done. That stuff's always good to see. It's one of the best parts of any fandom, is just seeing people sort of creating art, cosplay, other podcasts that, you know, that we've all affiliated with and stuff like that. And largely speaking, the willingness for all these little Resident Evil brands to collaborate with each other. I'll talk to people that have no idea about such a thing and be like, oh yeah, we're doing a thing with another Resident Evil podcast. And they're like, there's another Resident Evil podcast? I'm like, let me tell you how many Resident Evil podcasts there are. It's a whole, we haven't, you know, we didn't invent this. It's a whole market right
This week there is 7,478. Next week, 14,742.
Yeah, so yeah, the community's an ever-evolving beast, certainly. And it's been nice to become a part of that, which I guess nicely brings us round to First Aid Spray and how it's somehow been 5 years since we recorded the first episode where, and I've told some of the story before, where I was just like, Steve, want to do a podcast? And you were like, okay, cool. And we just, and we just kind of did it, and now we're still doing it, overworking ourselves to the bone with the amount of shows that we do at this point. But it's been a ridiculous ride when I think about, I can remember, my memory's terrible, you all know this if you're a First Aid Spray fan, I can remember recording that first episode and how weird it was, sitting in the bedroom in the place that I used to live, with my old MacBook, I guess, and a voice conversation of all these people that had barely spoken to each other, if not ever spoken to each other, and just like, we're just going to record and see what happens. And obviously, there's an episode out there where most of us are met in person for our 4th anniversary. To get to that point, it's really cool, and we've got another year under our belt. We're halfway to a decade of First Aid Spray, and considering the first 5 years, the first 5 years have flown by. Steve was making a face for audio listeners. We're going to get to that, another 5 years before too long. And you know what? I feel like I'm rambling away, and there's just so many aspects that I could talk about, but for 5 years, there's still we barely scratched the surface, I feel like. There's so much that we haven't done. We haven't talked about the CGI movies. We haven't talked about 0, 6, 5 Revelations, either of the Revelations games. Outbreak 2, we only just got around to Outbreak 1. That's just the games and the movies. There's so much more that we could do. So don't worry, we're not light on content to come. Steve, 5 years of First Aid Spray, you've been on basically every single thing we've put out. I'm so sorry for putting you through all of that.
No, it's fun. I love it. I get to rock up and be a complete pain in the arse. It's all good. Because sometimes I come across like I know what I'm talking about, and other times I'm Steve. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. For me, it's like there are many little mini projects we've done throughout First Aid Spray. Some are taken off, some not so much. But I love when we dabble and do those kind of things. And over these past 5 years, I think I wasn't actually involved in the beginning with Nerd Masons and stuff, pretty much. Still love that. I love the fact that we managed to take a book that was only available in Japan, turn it into an audio drama. I'm sorry, I'm going to toot our own horn a bit. It didn't get enough views, it pisses me off. Okay? Go listen to Biohazard at the beginning. That kind of thing. And then you've got a moment of relief. You've got Itchy Painty pretty much running streams, doing all the fine details on how to paint all the miniatures in the board game with Burger. Memory Card Lane, which was a pet project between me, Sherwin, and Jordan. Fun stuff. I love doing that, especially when it's all Resident Evil related. Mm-hmm. It's amazing because normally group projects, I've been a part of a few group projects over my lifetime, and some haven't worked out, and First Aid Spray is definitely one of those that is, at least for the moment. We might all fall out in 5 minutes.
I hope not. It would be a disastrous end. It's like, 5 more years anyway. I hate everyone.
You said what about that one item in RE1? Scowling words. No. But my point is, it's been fun the entire time. Like, there has not been a point where I've got to do First Aid Spray today. I'm not bothered. Never lacking enthusiasm. And the fact that we're doing this with other people who also share that enthusiasm is great. I would have passed the pulpit over before I rambled us to death.
I didn't know what this show was necessarily going to be when it started, and especially because, as I say, most of these people didn't know each other at all when it started. It's like, this could be an abject disaster. But we get to the point where we all hang out in person, and I feel like we all know each other pretty well, and we can kind of know each other's strengths and weaknesses and what needs to be navigated in certain ways to make everyone comfortable. That part's really cool. And I did want to echo, some of the stuff that you said about Resident Evil at the beginning. That was a really fun thing to do during the pandemic. Obviously, we started in 2018, just right at the end of 2018. So we were only a year and a bit into the show, really, before, everything changes. And lots of us had way more free time, which is why we've got too many shows on our docket. Because I was just like, let's make loads of stuff. And then I just haven't been able to tone it back. But that's, that kind of was born out of that time that we had available to create stuff like that. And that's when the streaming began. And I'm really happy. One small thing, which sadly no longer exists because Twitch deletes its streams after 2 weeks, and I never bothered to save them all. But streaming through all of Resident Evil 2, the board game, because I had so much free time and did that. That was fun, and I'd like to do that with the other games. It's just difficult to find the time now that life is back to normal. I think it's a shame about some of the. We don't really care too much about view stuff. Obviously, for the amount of work that we put in, it would be nice to get more views. Obviously. But I think the important thing is that we just still have fun doing it, clearly, and it is nice to see the response that we do get. It's a shame about Memory Card Lane. I don't think people realise just how much time was put into trying to craft that show. The amount of sort of behind the scenes meetings we had about crafting it, and also when we kind of decided to, and I don't think we've ever officially acknowledged that obviously it's on indefinite hiatus now because people weren't responding to it, and there's not much point of us putting effort into something that people weren't responding to at all. That's just the way it goes sometimes, and when you identify that and have to take a step away, that's just part of the process of creating it. And I just couldn't ask for a group of people to have those meetings and conversations with, and we all goof off, but we can also have the sort of business meetings, and we take it quite professionally behind the scenes and stuff like that. Absolutely. So shout out to everybody. And also, at Itchy Painty, we don't talk about it enough. We talk about it on social media, but it doesn't really come up on our regular shows. But the fact that Burger kind of has carried that for so long, pretty damn regularly, is really, really impressive and commemorative and commendable and all that. That's the word I was looking for. Kelsey, I'm going to throw to you because I'm now rambling. Any thoughts on 5 years of First Aid Spray?
So in my life, outside of, through this screen and through this microphone, I'm the biggest Resident Evil fan that I know personally. So I don't really have anybody in my life that I can create and discuss and just kind of shoot the about Resident Evil in my real life that I can with everybody at First Aid Spray and the wider community. So for me to kind of come on board and be more involved with the show like I was, because obviously I wasn't there at the day one, but I came on board later. It was I was always so happy to have the opportunity to do the shows that we do. You know, just the review shows alone, like, as much as I love them, they're also some of the hardest stuff we do, because we approach things a little bit differently to some people. And I think it may or may not shine through, but I think the thought that goes into our reviews and the structure of the shows, you know, this is very chilled, us just having a conversation. This is not like our review shows, you know, and certainly for me, I take it very seriously. You know, I think about what I'm going to say, and I think about, and I listening to people and taking from it and learning. And just so those review shows, yeah, they mean a lot to me. And when I mean, it's so weird as well, because this thing like Resident Evil that's been in my life, as I say, I'm the biggest Resident Evil fan that I know in my life. And then I look at something like Resident Evil 2, which was there for me forever. And then last year, when did we do it? When did we do the review? The start of this year for Resident Evil 2. When we did that episode, like, I was... So I was so drugged up on like 4 different like pieces of medication after having my tooth out.
Yeah.
I had,
bless you.
Not other kinds of drugs. I wasn't taking any LSD or anything like that. But
I'd be out of the podcast if it was.
I was in really rough shape, and there was no way I was going to miss that episode. Yeah. And I've listened back to it like a couple of times, and it's kind of a little bit emotional listening to it, because it's this thing that's been there in my entire life, and I have never ever been able to discuss it in that kind of fashion for like more than 5 minutes.
Right.
So that episode just means so much to me, and I absolutely love that. And then, but the same, I love it when I get to talk about anything I love at length, because I don't get to do it in real life. So First Aid Spray, that's what it is for me. It's me getting able to really get into the weeds of the things that I love with people that I like, and like I say, learn, and just kind of, yeah, it's really difficult to put into words, and it is fun as well. And then I think of things like now that's what I call survival horror, which again I really love doing. The music show is so good, and yeah, and getting to meet everybody in person last year. It's so frustrating that, you know, distance and finances like stop us from doing this more often, because again, you just take from experiences like that stuff that you cannot take. You know, as much as I enjoy doing these video calls and podcasts, it's always better in person. And so, you know, hopefully we get to do that again soon, because it's awesome, and everybody on the show is awesome. You put it really well, Si. Everybody brings something to the show that I think is quite unique, and I'm always striving to be the best person as part of First Aid Spray that I could be, as cheesy as that sounds, because we do take it seriously, and I think we take it seriously, more seriously than maybe some other people take their own shows, and maybe to our own detriment. I don't know, it's so difficult to understand. But yeah, the show means a lot to me. Everything we do means a lot to me. Everyone puts in so much work, and yeah, we've just, like, say 5 years, but there's so much more to talk about, and there's going to be so much more to come. It's absolutely crazy, and yeah, just I'm very thankful that I'm a part of the team. I have no kind of I suppose I have no... I love all the other shows and everything that's out there, and I will listen to people talk about the stuff that I love forever. Like, it doesn't matter. It's not like, I know how Resident Evil 1 works, but I always want to know what someone else thinks about it. You know, I will hear that forever and ever. So, and that's what I get out of First Aid Spray. It's like, all right, I might have played this game 20 times, but I want to know what you think about it, and let's talk about it. And we get to do that here in a really, you know, in-depth way that I just do not do in my normal daily life. So that's what I get from it.
I wish I had like counted all the hours of content that we've put out at this point, because when you talk about, you know, I've never had, or not really had the experience to talk about a subject for more than 5 minutes in my real life, and then I come on First Aid Spray and we do regular 2 hours episodes. And then with a review show it can be like 4 hours long and split into several parts, which... And I'm sure I've said this before, but to go back to saying about we didn't know what First Aid Spray was when we talked about it. We had a little meeting beforehand about sort of kicking around some ideas. Oh yeah, we'll do this thing at the end. I was like, we'll do this thing at the end of the so-called bite-sized discussion where we'll answer like a question. That died after one season because it was just kind of pointless. But some of the other notes that were on there were First Aid Spray is a working title. we'll figure something out.
It's just stuck now, right?
That's what it is. And the other one, of course, is that we talked about podcast length and that we were comfortable and what we thought best would resonate with people. And we were like, yeah, like an hour and a half, you know, maybe, you know, sort of about an hour is a good sweet spot. Have we ever done an hour-long show? Yeah, exactly. All of them.
I think just like to just kind of touch on like the RE2 thing. I know I said in my summary, it's not possible for me to do a podcast and feel like I've fully expressed my feelings of a game like that, but at least we get to do it. And I think you've got to spend time. I mean, that's what I like. Whether people like listening to 3-hour shows, you know, fine. But I like hearing stuff at length because in a world of social media, clickbait, opinions and stuff, I just have no interest. I very rarely tweet opinions these days because it's kind of pointless. And this is why I love the show, because we actually get to talk about it, you know, and really get into it.
Yeah, no.
Sorry.
Thanks, Steve. No, absolutely. And I think that, generally speaking, you know, basically the way I look at it is we've not really had any complaints about the long shows, so we're just going to carry on doing them. If people don't listen to them, then that's fine. That's what we said about Memory Card Lane and that kind of thing.
The pause function's there for a reason.
Yeah, basically. And I hope that what you were saying about, you know, it's when you're on the show, or whether you're not when you're on the show or not, it's like to be able to engage and almost feel like you're part of that conversation. And I've heard that from people, and that's obviously really nice. You know, it's like I don't have anyone to talk about Resident Evil in my day-to-day life. My friends are not interested or whatever. So listen to the podcast is like hanging out with a group of friends, which is obviously that's such a great compliment for us. And that's sort of, I feel like we found our niche a little bit. We don't drag in. Steve, you said, say drag in, that sounds harsh, about the voice actors and stuff. We don't go out of our way to get the voice actors in. We're happy if they were, you know, to talk to us, or we got in a good rapport, it could happen. I'm not saying that it wouldn't ever happen, but we've not gone out of our way. That's what other people and other channels have done. So, you know, what could we possibly add to that and that kind of thing? And as you say, Steve, some of them have got their own brands and channels to do their own thing anyway. So it's like, what can we really do? So I feel like we've sort of cultivated our own space there. And what you're saying about, you know, it being sort of an emotional thing, to get a little bit soft about it before we move on a little bit. I have received some of the most unforgettable messages from people because of First Day Spray, because of this stupid Resident Evil podcast that we started, where we were excited about Remake 2. I have received some incredibly touching messages from people about the impact that it's had on their life, and this is just a stupid podcast. But the fact that I've had people come and say, you know, this was really important to me when I was, you know, feeling low, or I was in hospital and it got me through some really long days and stuff like that. It's like, okay, cool. So I'm just going to keep doing it then. Like, sorry, but that is the feel, you know.
Going on off that note, like the COVID pandemic hit a lot of us very hard, right? Like I was one of these unfortunate souls who was still working, and this community, this podcast community on the Discord itself, right, pretty much got me through that, because we were like literally playing the often maligned, and noticed that no one said anything bad about Resident Evil Resistance.
Yes,
you know,
good times.
Shout out to the squad for the entirety of that, and I know a lot of them are still active on the server. Like we still hang out, we still chat. One of the two carrots, the other carrot, if you will, Luigi, is also part of that squad. Unbelievable. Like that I appreciate that we have helped people, and I'm glad that people in this community have helped me as well. I cannot be grateful enough for that. Those days, honestly, some of the best days of the pandemic, which is a weird thing to say.
Right. I get you. I also, before we move on, this is a sort of an aside point I didn't get to mention before. I'm glad that you said now that's what I call survival horror, Kelsey, because I think... Nitswitch, yeah.
Nitswitch.
So Steve, you're giving them all the behind-the-scenes secrets. Nitswitch.
Just post an Ipswich sign up.
I think, generally speaking, is like the favourite show of pretty much the entire team. Like everyone's like, that's my favourite thing that we do. I really enjoy making it, or I really enjoy listening to it. It's certainly one of my favourite things that we do. Absolutely. Okay, so we've obviously don't want to talk about us too much, because I know it's not everybody's interest, but 5 years, so we should absolutely do it. But just to sort of close it up, we're not talking about the future of First Aid Spray. I don't actually have any bombshells, to be honest. Spoiler alert. It's just going to carry on being the same great show you know and love. But for the future of Resident Evil, we're in a really weird space right now. So we've got a few more minutes just to say, what do you think is next? Because for the first time within this 5 years that I can think of, we have no idea what's coming up next. Maybe with the exception of Remake 2, we weren't convinced or sure. We hadn't been told there was a Remake 3. But after then, we knew, what was coming. We knew it was going to be Resident Evil 8. We knew about Death Island. We knew about XYZ, DLC, all this stuff. But now we've had separate ways done. Capcom haven't announced anything. The only production that we know about that's being worked on is Resident Evil Infinite Darkness, the beginning, the comic book series. I think that is genuinely the only thing that's still ongoing. Steve, what do you think is next for Resident Evil?
Oh, we're playing with a loaded gun here, aren't
I don't think it's... do you follow a remake up with a remake? Or is it too early for Resident Evil 9? Are we finally going to get a side game? It could be anything.
Yeah.
I genuinely think now is the time for RE9. But do I think that's what's going to happen? No.
Yeah.
I think we're going to get an RE5 remake or an RE1 remake. And that's going to already split the fandom up, because I'm not completely off the idea of playing something, but remake fatigue is setting in a little. Yeah. I would love a Revelations 3. I would love a side game that's just pure nonsense and on the tin, obvious this is just nonsense, like The Mercenaries, like a actual celebratory game. But do I think that's going to happen? No, I think we're going to get a remake, which is a shame in some regards, because it may find to be that RE9 is the first game that its remake come out before its original title.
I want it to be something, kind of stupid, or not stupid as so much as out the box. I don't think it's going to happen. I think the Capcom of the 2000s, where they were just trying out every idea under the sun, that's not the same company that is today. In the era where we would get Outbreaks and Dead Aims and stuff like this, we're putting Deadly Silence on the DS, which is weird, sort of like, oh, okay, kind of stuff. I would love a weird, isometric top-down resi or something just like we've never done before to break up this sort of malaise, not malaise, but the fatigue of first person game, third person remake. I want something wild next, but I agree that it's going to happen.
What's that game that oh god, it's the one that Neptune's always swinging about, Confidential Report. Where's our isometric, get Rose Engine to do it.
I want a Resident Evil, right? I want a Resident Evil roguelike. That's just something really, and it doesn't have to be marketed as a big title, but there needs to be. I think we're in a spot now where the next thing needs to be a small holdover for the next big thing. I don't think we can jump right into another remake right away, and I don't think Resident Evil 9 is ready, as you say. I don't think it's that time yet. Maybe it's the classic collection. If it's any time is the time is now. But watch you say that again in 5 more years. Kelsey, what do you think is next for Resident Evil?
It's so difficult. The video game industry is a very strange place. I feel like Capcom they just lined up productions at just the right time, and that's how they've managed to kind of swing through these last few years. And they haven't had to worry about trends or, and what's happening in the industry. They looked at ReVerse, and that was you look at ReVerse, and it's like maybe that was going to be their live service thing, and it just died on its arse. And video game industry is in a weird place. What do Capcom do? I hope they continue to play to their strengths. What do I think is next? I honestly don't even know, and I'm not even sure they know. I mean, like I say, I think they had a production pipeline which they've completed, and they've maybe had some surprise feedback along the way. I do think remakes will continue to come. I'm not sure remake is next. I feel like another game will be next. I feel like a remake after a remake. I don't even know if Capcom are that bold or sort of brazen.
They did it for 2 and 3, but then again, they were almost made in tandem, I'm led to believe.
Yeah, no, that is true. Fair
point. But I think you do that again, especially because that was only obviously it's the third, but the second remake as part of the RE Engine thing. At this point, as you said, the fatigue is set in, and not only are you've done the impossible by remaking Resident Evil 4 successfully. Yeah, the games that you follow up with are either 5, which is very divisive about whether people want a remake of it or not, or whether or not it's going to happen, and 1, which has already been remade. So again, very divisive. So they're potentially playing with fire. I think this is going to happen, and it will. Yeah, and I think it will be warmly received. But if you shove one out really fast, people are going to be like, "Hang on a minute, can we do something else for a little while?"
Yeah, I think the 1 remake will eventually come. I've spoken about that before, but I would really like, and I've said it before, there's a Devil May Cry animated series on the way. Give us our Resident Evil animated series. Where is it? It's the only one that's not been done. Of course, Classic Collection as well. I'd love that. I mean, again, there's a million reasons maybe why that hasn't come around. Maybe it's not feasible with just the technology, and blowing that up to 4K is just not going to work, or they don't want to put the work in. I don't know. But yeah, if you think about outside of games, I'll take the animated series tomorrow. There is apparently a new movie rumoured to be in the works as well. Who knows what's going to be there? So it's definitely not the end of Resident Evil. There's
too much money in it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
where's the new stage?
Yeah, no, Capcom are good at surprises, I think, and I think we'll have a surprise probably sooner rather than later, and then we'll just be there'll be more Resident Evil as always to talk about. They've got their production's been really good over the past few years, and they may surprise us yet. And RE9 might be half finished for all we know, but Maybe. So I'm very excited. Like I say, I feel like my fandom for the franchise is bigger than it's ever been. I feel like the franchise itself is bigger than it's ever been, and there's just going to be so much to talk about, and I'm very excited for it.
Indeed. I don't know if the new game is going to get announced maybe until sort of summer next year. That would be my prediction. But obviously...
Not Game Awards, say. That's this December.
That seems too soon for me, but I could be wrong. Yeah, maybe RE9 is much closer than we think. I mean, by come 2024, it'll be 3 years since Village. So, I don't know. Maybe it's time to start building that hype cycle, but... Either way, whatever it is, of course, on the over-planned spreadsheet I've got on the Google Drive for First Aid Spray, there is a slot for next season that just says new game in italics, because there is some kind of assumption that we're going to have something. And if we don't, we'll just fill it in with, as I said, one of the many other things that we haven't talked about yet on First Aid Spray. Fear not, we have plenty of stuff to tide us over until it's time for us to start talking about the new Resident Evil release. But just to close it up, thank you everyone for checking out this episode of A Moment of Relief and checking out First Aid Spray over the last 5 years. Whether you're new to the show or you've been here since the beginning, we appreciate you no matter what. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you, Steve, for joining me.
Thank you, me.
Thank you, Kelsey, for joining me.
Thank you, Si. You said earlier you couldn't ask for a better group of people. We couldn't ask for a better host and person in charge. You talk about spreadsheet, like, people don't know that's not a joke. Like,
it's organised.
It's like one spreadsheet and then everything else that goes into our chats and stuff that we have behind the scenes. So big shout out and big love to you. So five more years. 5 more years.
I have an organisation problem, okay?
We can Achilles heel side though. They do occasionally get their Tuesdays and Wednesdays mixed up.
That's true.
Just saying. They are easily the most organised, but then they'll think of Tuesdays and Wednesday and we'll all go.
We can forgive
sure
that.
That's not a day on the 14th.
Yeah, that's not a day on the calendar, Si. Okay, awesome. Thank you for again checking out A Moment of Relief. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't, and of course, have a good week.
Hey.
Yay.